Hello students, welcome to my channel. This lecture is from the chapter Support and Movement, and the learning objectives of today's class are abnormal muscle contractions, fatigue, agonist and antagonist, and the movement of a shoulder joint. So these four topics will be covered in today's class, and you will have a good command after the completion of this lecture on these topics. So let's start with the abnormal muscle contractions. Abnormal muscle contractions. What does mean by the abnormal muscle contractions? Abnormal muscle contractions mean that the muscular contractions become abnormal. Okay. The two main types of abnormal muscle contractions are one is tetany and other is cramps. These are the two main types. Let's talk about tetany. What is tetany? Tetany is defined as a sudden involuntary contractions of a striated muscle caused by the low level of calcium in the blood. The cause of tetany is the low level of calcium in the blood. When there is a low level of calcium in the blood, the low level of calcium in the blood is also called hypocalcemia. When there is hypocalcemia in the blood, that hypocalcemia lead to the activation of the neuromuscular pathway, excessive activation of neuromuscular pathway, and causes sudden involuntary contractions of a striated muscle. uh, Sudden involuntary contractions of a striated muscle. It is characterized by the spasm of hands and feet, cramps, and muscle twitching. Mostly, tetany is mostly seen in the hands and feet. Okay, and we see the cramps and muscle twitching. What does mean by cramps? Cramps are the sudden involuntary contractions of the muscles of the hand and feet, mostly. But it can also occurs in the abdominal musculature, in the respiratory musculature, in all other musculatures of a body. In this condition, the muscle fibers are under constant contraction. They are constantly contracting. They are under constant stress. Okay. So here are the diagrams which are showing the muscle cramps and twitching, muscular twitching, involuntary contractions. You can see here also. Okay. Now moving towards cramps. What are cramps? Cramps are the sudden involuntary contractions of a skeletal muscle. These are also called muscle pull. Cramps are also called muscle pull. Cramps are also seen in the tetany. So this is a type of tetanic contraction. Okay. It mostly occurs in the musculature of limbs, but can also affect abdominal musculature, respiratory musculature, and other musculatures of a body. What are the main causes of cramps? Cramps can occur in every individual due to these causes. If a person is dehydrated, then the cramps can occur. If dehydrated means that the level of fluid in the body is very low. When there is an electrolyte imbalance, it can also cause cramps. Electrolyte imbalance means when there is a low level of calcium in the blood, when there is a low level of magnesium in the blood, when there is a low level of sodium ions in the blood, it can also cause cramps. When there is a low level of when there is a low level of sugar in the blood, it can also cause cramps. Okay, mostly the low level of sugar in the blood occurs after a heavy exercise. When a person do heavy exercise, when he or she lifts a heavy weight, and after that heavy exercise, there will be a low level of calcium in the blood, and that low level of calcium in the blood can cause cramps. Okay, these cramps are most commonly seen in the sportsman because of the heavy work, heavy exercise, heavy workout they do, and after that, level of calcium in the blood causes low level of calcium and low level of sugar. Sorry, low level of sugar in the blood causes cramps. Okay, so you can see here these are the cramping of the hands. Okay. Now the second topic is fatigue. What does mean by fatigue? When a person feels pain and tiring, the condition is called fatigue. Okay. So here to explain this topic, I am taking two examples. In the first example, of a person, the person is doing a normal exercise, not the heavy exercise. When a person do normal, not so heavy exercise, then for that workout, for that exercise, he or she needs energy. And how, from where that energy comes? Skeletal muscles require energy for the contraction, and that energy comes from the muscle glycogen. The glycogen is present in the muscles, and when a person do exercise, normal exercise, not so heavy exercise, that glycogen is converted into glucose, and then that glucose converts into ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. That ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the energy currency, and that energy currency will be utilized by the skeletal muscles in their contraction in the workout. Okay, that production of ATP from the glycogen to the glucose to the ATP production, this occurs through the process called respiration. Okay, respiration. This occurs in a normal exercise. But when a person do a prolonged heavy exercise, for example, he or she is doing an exercise for 3 hours, for 4 hours, and that exercise is very heavy and very difficult exercise, then due to prolonged and heavy exercise, the oxygen level in the body will be low, and due to that low level of oxygen in the blood, respiration cannot takes does not takes place. Normal aerobic respiration does not takes place, and normal production of ATP does not takes place. During that condition, when the level of oxygen in the blood is low due to prolonged and heavy exercise, then another process occurs through which the ATP produced. That process is called fermentation. Okay. Fermentation is also called anaerobic respiration. Respiration occurs in the absence of oxygen is called anaerobic respiration. Okay, or fermentation. During the process of fermentation, because of the low level of oxygen in the blood, glycogen converts into glucose, and then due to the absence of oxygen in the blood, glucose cannot be converted into carbon dioxide, water, and a large amount of ATP. Instead of converting into ATP, carbon dioxide, and water, that glucose converts into lactic acid, which is an intermediate product. And that lactic acid is very poisonous and dangerous for the skeletal muscle. Due to the accumulation of that lactic acid in the skeletal muscles, patient feels fatigue, patient feels pain, patient has a musculoskeletal pain, and he or she has a tiring appearance, and a very dull appearance. So that condition is called fatigue due to the fermentation. That fatigue occurs due to the fermentation and the production and accumulation of lactic acid within the skeletal muscles. Okay, then after some time, after 30-40 minutes, and after some time, when the person stops that heavy and prolonged exercise, then and the level of oxygen in the blood is again come to normal, then that lactic acid, which was the intermediate product and accumulated in the skeletal muscle, then lactic acid then breaks down into carbon dioxide and water and ATP. Okay, so then when the lactic acid level in the skeletal muscles will be reduced, this causes the decreased level of lactic acid in the skeletal muscle, and due to this reason, the muscle fatigue will be vanished or will go away. Okay, and the patient again feels normal. So here is the diagram that is showing the very heavy strenuous exercise, very prolonged heavy exercise. He is lifting a very heavy weight. And after that heavy weight lifting, that lactic acid accumulates within the skeletal muscle because of the lactic acid accumulates within the skeletal muscle because of the fermentation process, and patient feels fatigue. And when the oxygen levels in the blood is come back to normal, then that fatigue goes away. Moving forward, the third topic is antagonistic muscles. What does mean by antagonistic muscles? The muscles which act in counteraction to each other are called antagonistic muscles. Skeletal muscles work in pairs. Mostly the muscle work in pairs. When one muscle is contracting, other muscle is relaxed. When the second muscle is contracting, the first muscle will be relaxed. So the skeletal muscles usually work in pairs. And antagonistic muscles are those muscles that work in counteraction to each other. One muscle of a pair contracts to bend the joint and the other muscle of a pair contracts to straighten the joint. Such a set of muscle is called antagonistic muscles. Okay. So here is the example of an antagonistic muscle. The one best and the easiest example is the bicep and tricep muscles, which are antagonistic to each other. Okay. So here is the diagram, this top diagram. This diagram is showing this muscle, these bicep and tricep, these are the muscles of arm. Okay, these are arm muscle. This is the humerus bone, and in front of humerus bone there is a muscle called bicep, and this muscle is called tricep. Okay, when bicep contracts, it bends the elbow joint, and when the bicep is contracting, the tricep is relaxed. Okay, it bends the bicep contraction, bends the elbow joint. In the second diagram, when the tricep is contracting, the bicep is relaxed, and the contraction of tricep does not bend the joint, it straightens the joint. Okay, you can see the bending of joint is due to the contraction of bicep muscle, and the straightening of the joint is due to the contraction of tricep muscle. When the bicep is contracting, tricep is relaxed. When the tricep is contracting, the bicep is relaxed. Okay. Biceps matlab a bicep muscle means that two heads, a muscle with two heads. Okay. And the tricep means a muscle with three heads. Tricep has three heads and bicep has two heads. Okay, these two muscles are antagonistic to each other. Bicep and triceps are antagonistic to each other. So you can see another this gif. This is showing that the bicep, when the bicep is contracting, the elbow joint is bent. When the tricep contracts, the elbow joint straighten. Okay. Now the fourth topic is the shoulder joint. Shoulder joint is a synovial joint of ball and socket movement. Okay. Shoulder joint is a synovial type of a joint. This type of a joint, this shoulder joint, is formed by between the two bones. One bone is the scapula and the other bone is the humerus. Okay. These two bones contribute in the formation of shoulder joint. So here they are showing the ribs, and on the back of the ribs there is a scapula bone. Okay, they are showing scapula and they have removed ribs from the front. Okay, so the two bones, the scapula and the humerus, take part in the formation of shoulder joint. The glenoid cavity of the scapula, basically the glenoid cavity, the articulation takes place between the glenoid cavity of the scapula and the head of the humerus. So this shoulder joint is also called the glenohumeral joint, between the glenoid cavity of the scapula and the head of the humerus, so called the glenohumeral joint. And this type of a joint, this shoulder joint, is a ball and socket joint. Other example of a ball and socket joint is the hip joint, which takes place between the hip bone and the femur and the head of the femur. Okay. It is the most mobile joint of the body. Here, one important point is both the shoulder joint and the hip joint, both are the ball and socket joint. But when we compare the shoulder joint with the hip joint, the shoulder joint has a large amount, it produces wide range of movement as compared to hip joint. Okay, so in comparison to the hip joint, shoulder joint produces a large range of movement. many movement can occur in many directions on the shoulder joint. Okay, so the movements, wide range of movements which occur in the shoulder joint are: one is flexion. What does mean by flexion? Flexion is the decreasing in the angle of two bones is called flexion, or moving forward of the arm is called flexion. Okay, extension is the moving backward of the arm is extension. Adduction means the movement of the arm towards the midline. Towards the midline is adduction. Abduction means movement of arm away from the midline. Okay, is abduction. Medial rotation means rotation of the arm towards the midline is medial rotation. Lateral rotation means rotation of the arm away from the midline is called lateral rotation. Okay, and pronation means the forward movement, or the um, from right to left movement, and supination means backward movement. So, and the external rotation and internal rotation. Internal rotation is also called the medial rotation, or rotation of the arm towards the midline, and lateral rotation is also called the external rotation away from the midline. Okay. So this was all about today's lecture. Okay. Now the multiple choice questions. The first question is: during fermentation, glucose is converted into dash. A. Glycogen, B. Carbon dioxide, C. Lactic acid, D. Water. The second question is: tetany occurs due to the low level of dash in the blood. A. Sodium, B. Calcium, C. Magnesium, D. Iron. This was all about today's lecture. Thank you so much, guys. Don't forget to share and subscribe.